Thank you very much for agreeing for this interview, Leslie. So I will start by asking you about Armenian-Iranian relationship. After the nuclear deal was announced, many in Armenia were hoping that this could really open up the trade relations between Armenia and Iran. And, you know, Armenians were hoping also that export-oriented economy will grow in Armenia. Armenians will be able to export their goods to Iran, and a lot of investment will flow to Armenia. But it seems to me that things are really slow. They're not everything happening that fast that everybody was expecting. What's your take on that? What do you think? Is this lifting sanctions against Iran will somehow benefit Armenian economy and the region in general?
Well, first, Harry, thank you very much for having me on. This is my first time in Armenia, but I'm having an excellent experience so far, and everyone's been really welcoming. And I also, before we get into the specifics of this, want to thank Armenia and the Armenian people for the sacrifices that Armenia made to help to enforce our sanctions regime. I think it was all of us working together as the international community that enforcing the sanctions that brought Iran to the negotiating table finally. So this is everyone's victory that Iran has curtailed its nuclear program and that sanctions were lifted. Your question about is a very good one. And it's what Armenia is seeing is not just in Armenia. I think everyone is seeing a bit of a slower pace of a return to a natural relationship with Iran than we expected. The Iranians, to be honest, I think had some unrealistic expectations about how fast this would go. But having said that, I just think a couple things. One is it will take time. The United States is very much committed to standing by what we promised during the nuclear deal, which is that we removed our secondary sanctions against Iran and all of our nuclear-related sanctions. But we did keep on some of our bilateral sanctions, particularly those related to Iran's support for terrorism and its human rights record. And because those sanctions are still in place, I do think there are some companies that are a bit cautious about going forward because they're not yet sure what that would mean for future business with Iran. They're trying to be cautious. And we are trying to explain to those governments and banks and companies that we do not stand in the way of legitimate business with Iran. So, but I do think that that's been a little bit of a cautionary measure going forward. It's also new for us. You know, we haven't had relations with Iran at all since 1979. And although we still don't have relations with them, we did manage to achieve this deal. So for us, it's going to take a while, I think, for us to absorb exactly how to go forward with this and make sure that Iran gets the relief that it deserves. But at the same time, the United States has other problems with Iran, and we still need to address those issues between us, the two countries. Another thing that I've heard, and I think that this also will correct with time, is that Iran's banking system is a bit antiquated in some ways, and that needs to catch up with the rest of the world. So I think that it will take time, but I see no reason why Armenia in particular as a neighbor can't flourish with the new relationship with Iran, and that its businesses in particular can't expand as its ties with the people also grow.
Interesting point. So which means that despite the fact that the U.S. is not still there, major sanctions against Iran related to human rights and other issues, does that mean that Armenia can start, can just expand its trade relations with Iran? Is there any sanction there? Is there any restriction for Armenians to go there, to invest there, and or to bring Iranian investors to Armenia? How can Armenian businessmen, they want to know really what is the situation right now?
Exactly.
It seems to me is not certain. There is no certainty on this issue.
Yes.
Can you just enlighten us?
Yes. No, it's a good question. Thank you. I am not aware, I'm not an expert in Armenian law or Iranian law, but I do not know of any reasons why your two countries can't do direct business together on any business that you care to. Where it becomes complicated is when the business in particular might touch on the United States. The Iranian businesses, I don't think, have an issue with that because they've been separated us for some time. But there are many businesses, as you know, that are multinational, and that's where I would urge any business that has ties to the United States in one way or another to reach out to our Treasury Department and to the Office of Foreign Assets Control to check whether whatever it is that they're thinking about doing is legal. But if it's a straight transaction between two governments or two countries, members of two countries, I'd see, unless there's some other law that I'm not aware of, there's no reason the United States would support that.
Restriction on that.
Not that I'm aware
So after nuclear deal, there is certain degree of skepticism about prospects of U.S.-Iranian relationship. And there's still, as you said, a lot of issues to be deal with. But we also heard on Tuesday that Boeing cut a deal with Iran, right? And they're going to sell 100 aircraft to Iran, and the deal is about 25 billion, which is huge. But there are still, it should be approved by the U.S. Congress. This is the first major, announcement about the big business deal. What's your take on that? Do you think that this will go fast, or
it is a big business
it can
deal.
be killed in the Congress? What's your?
I'm not aware that Congress can kill this bill. This deal. I think it's made directly between an Iranian airline. I think it's Iran Airlines, and then Boeing Airlines. So it's a direct deal. And Boeing has assured us that it is going to go forward and has been consulting with the U.S. government regularly and will continue to do so as it goes forward. So I think this shows that although it may move more slowly than people think, it is possible to do business with Iran. It's also very important not to run afoul of our sanctions. Our sanctions, we know, can be complicated, and I think many companies and business people are worried about that, which, as you pointed out at the beginning, is going a bit slowly. But as this deal shows, it can happen even with an American company. So I know that many companies, including those we talked about, businesses that have no ties to the United States, but there are many companies with ties to U.S. banks and U.S. business that are also looking at what's possible. And we recognize that this is a complicated undertaking sometimes because our sanction laws are complicated. And even for someone like me who works on Iran every day, it's complicated. And we have experts that look at these things very closely and consult with policymakers. So again, even though this isn't the answer some people want, I would encourage anyone who really has a question to go to our Treasury Department and our Office of Foreign Assets Control to talk about their particular situation and get guidance about what can and cannot be done.
Do you see any improvement on human rights issues in Iran? Have you seen anything after the nuclear deal was announced? Are they trying really to improve human rights?
Unfortunately, we haven't seen an improvement, and that is one of the issues that we're very concerned about. The United States has a difficult relationship with the Iranian government, but we have no quarrel with the Iranian people, who we actually see as, look at very favorably. The attitudes of the American people towards the Iranian people is one of friendship. And so we are concerned about the way that the government treats its minority populations, its women, and just generally how it treats its people. So we do hope that over time that will also improve so that we can take off our sanctions that are related to human rights.
And there's another aspect of U.S.-Iranian relationship. The people, Iranian people, are so eager to go to the West, to the States, and I can see it even here. Where I stay in a hotel, and I see a lot of Iranians are coming, they're just taking off all these clothes that hide their, identities even. And you can see they have huge appetite for it. And are there any restrictions on this issue? For example, if Iranian wants to go to the States, how difficult it is now, or was there any, opening up, in U.S. consulates, in terms of giving them visa? Is there any easing of the restrictions for Iranian citizens?
Unfortunately, we have had no easing of our visa restrictions. It's true that many Iranians are able to get visas to the United States. It takes a long time sometimes, but they are able to come to the United States to study, for tourism, to visit family, for whatever reason. And we anticipate that more will want to come, and we're extremely eager to have them come. We know, and I think we've seen here in Armenia, that the number of Iranian tourists all over the world is going to grow, and we're cognizant of that when it comes to visas. We recognize the delay is really quite long, and so we're going to work to see what we can do to change that. It's really quite difficult when you don't have an embassy. So we still don't have embassies in each other's capitals.
That's another question that I was going to ask.
And when? Without, just to finish this one, without an actual embassy in the country, it means that Iranians have to travel outside of Iran to come to one of our embassies like Yerevan or one of our consulates like Dubai and to apply for a visa there. We know that's difficult. On an embassy, I would like to think it will be sooner rather than later, but quite frankly, we're not close yet.
Are we talking about 5 years, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years?
Yeah. I wish I could say.
Short term or the long term?
I really wish I could say. I think some of this will also depend on the Iranian government and how fast it wants to move. In our case, I think we, obviously we have our continued issues with Iran. As I said before, we're worried about their continued support for terrorism, and we're worried about their human rights. But there are increasingly areas of cooperation in the Middle East where our interests overlap. We'd like to explore those. And in the end, I think it's important for any country's governments to be able to air their differences directly. So although we don't have relations with them, we do have more access to Iranian officials than we did before. We have our relations with countries like Russia where we don't agree. Sometimes we really don't agree, but we have representatives of our governments are able to talk directly to each other to at least explain what the thinking is and try and resolve any disputes. In the end, that's what we would like to see.
Speaking of Russia, we know that Russia is has the monopoly power here in Armenia and also in Caucasus, in South Caucasus. And in terms of economy and politics, political influence, and and opening up U.S.-Iranian relations will really bring Iran into the region. Do you think this is beneficial to have Iran here along with Russia? The competition between Iran and Russia might a little bit open up the economies here, and it can undercut Russian monopoly here. What do you think, especially on energy?
Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on Russia, so I don't know the answer to that. But what I can say, having worked mostly on the Middle East for my career, is that there are so many factors that we are not even aware of at this time that would play into the final analysis of how that happened. So, for now, we're looking at the nascent stage. I think we continue to just watch how this develops. There's so many things inside Iran, inside Russia, inside Armenia, inside the United States, particularly our presidential race, that will influence that as we go forward. So it's a tremendously complex question that you ask.
Yes, and the final question I'm going to ask about U.S. businesses, U.S. business interests in Iran. The Armenians think that when the U.S. interest grows in Iran, it will hugely benefit also Armenian economy because investment will flow to Iran and the economy will expand, and some of these investments will come to Armenia as well. Building infrastructure in neighboring countries. We know that oil industry, gas industry brings a lot of money not only to that specific country but also to the region. So is there any indication that there is big interest or small interest? Do we have any expectations? Do we have any forecast for that? Whether U.S.
Yes.
business is interested?
I mean, U.S. businesses have expressed more of an interest going back into Iran now, but they are aware that we still have significant sanctions in place. So that, holds them back from business that perhaps an Armenian business might now do. Armenia is a very close friend and ally of the United States of America, and I think that if we can come to a place with Iran where we can agree to have sanctions modified or lifted so that U.S. companies can come in to the same extent that Armenian companies can to Iran, that we would be very pleased to see those business interests, spread out to our other allies, and that obviously includes Armenia. We're just, the deal itself, the nuclear deal, and then the lifting of sanctions only happened in January of this year. And we're still processing in many ways how our relationship with Iran has changed. I mean, we haven't really had relations at all since 1979. And that's a long time not to speak to a country. But, enemies don't need to be enemies forever. We recognize that perhaps not everyone in Iran agrees with that, but we certainly don't think that. So I think we're just going to have to take it step by step.
Thank you very much, Leslie.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.